The static crackled across Channel 7, French-accented voices bleeding through electronic warfare jamming at 3:47 hours. Squadron leader Kestrel Voss pressed her headset tighter, catching fragments. Unknown contact. No IFF transponder, maintaining radio silence. The Rafale formation had been hunting ghosts for 2 hours above the Pyrenees, their AN/ALQ-131 jammers turning the electromagnetic spectrum into white noise. But something was different now. The static patterns weren't random. They were deliberate, mathematical, almost musical. Captain Marc Dubois adjusted his helmet display inside the lead Rafale's cramped cockpit, sweat beading beneath his oxygen mask despite the -40 temperatures at 35,000 feet. His radar showed empty sky, yet ground control insisted on a bogey. Falcon lead, this is Tower. Confirm visual contact with unknown aircraft, bearing 270, Angels 35. The transmission cut through interference like a knife. Negative visual, Tower. Scope is clean. Dubois' gloved fingers danced across the multifunction displays, cycling through air-to-air radar modes. Behind him, 3 more Rafales held formation, sleek delta-winged Predators painted in gunmetal gray, their twin SNECMA engines whisper quiet at cruise power. Then he saw it. Not an aircraft, not a missile. A pattern in the contrails 30 degrees off his starboard wing, vapor trails that shouldn't exist, arranged in a perfect heraldic crest against the deep purple of pre-dawn sky. The symbol seemed to shimmer, almost alive, as if someone had painted it with invisible ink that only appeared under specific light conditions. The morning stars formed constellation points around its edges. "Mon Dieu," whispered Lieutenant Sophie Morrow from Falcon 3. "Are you seeing this?" The jamming intensified, but now Dubois understood. This wasn't enemy electronic warfare. Someone was using the interference patterns themselves as a canvas, modulating frequencies to create visual art in the ionosphere. It required impossible precision, an understanding of atmospheric physics that bordered on supernatural. And skill, the kind of flying expertise that existed maybe once in a generation. Dubois had seen this before. 20 years ago, during joint exercises over Nevada, a ghost story whispered in squadron-ready rooms, dismissed by senior officers, cherished by younger pilots who understood that some legends were built on truth. The crest flickered again, a phoenix rising from geometric flames, wings spread against storm clouds that hadn't been there moments before. His radio crackled, "Falcon formation, this is Ghostwind. You're looking for me." The voice was female, calm, with traces of American accent weathered by years of international service. "I suggest you follow the breadcrumbs." The contrail crest dissolved, leaving only empty sky and the growing certainty that they were no longer the hunters. Squadron leader Kestrel Voss, callsign Ghostwind, pulled her F-35C Lightning into a gentle climb, invisible to radar, her stealth coating drinking electromagnetic radiation like black holes consume light. She'd been watching the French formation for 18 minutes, studying their search patterns, appreciating their discipline. Good pilots, but predictable. They flew by doctrine, by regulations, by the comfortable certainties of military procedure. She flew by instinct. The Lightning's cockpit wrapped around her like a second skin, panoramic displays showing God's-eye views of the battle space, sensor fusion painting reality in layers of digital precision. But Kestrel trusted her eyes more than electronics, her hands more than computers. At 42, she was too old for most air forces, too unconventional for peacetime commands, perfect for the kind of missions that didn't officially exist. Below, the Pyrenees stretched like a geological spine between France and Spain, snow-covered peaks catching first light. Beautiful country to die in, she thought, though dying wasn't on today's agenda. Today was about sending messages, subtle ones, written in vapor and electromagnetic poetry that only certain people would understand. The Rafales were tightening their search pattern, professional and methodical. Captain Dubois, she'd read his file, was competent but unimaginative. Textbook formations, textbook communications, textbook thinking. The kind of pilot who won exercises but lost wars. His wingmen were younger, hungrier, more willing to trust their instincts over instruments. She could work with that. Tower Falcon lead. We've lost the anomalous contact. Request guidance. Kestrel smiled, keying her transmitter to a frequency the jammers couldn't touch, an old NATO emergency channel that existed in regulatory limbo, technically illegal but practically essential. Falcon formation. Recommend you check your 6 o'clock high. Dubois' head snapped back, neck straining against G-forces as he cranked his Rafale into a climbing turn. The F-35 hung there like a metallic ghost, close enough to see details. The matte gray finish that seemed to absorb light, the angular geometry that confused radar waves, the single-engine exhaust that barely disturbed the thin air. "How long have you been there?" Dubois' voice carried professional embarrassment mixed with grudging respect. "Long enough to count the coffee stains on your canopy." Kestrel's tone was conversational, friendly even. She was here to make a point, not embarrass brave men doing their jobs. "Your formation discipline is excellent, by the way, very French, very precise." Lieutenant Morrow's Rafale slid closer, her pilot's curiosity overriding tactical caution. "This is Falcon 3. American pilot, what's your mission here?" "Training exercise officially, measuring response times, testing procedures." Kestrel's F-35 performed a lazy barrel roll, showing off its impossible maneuverability. The Lightning could change direction like thought made visible, physics bent to engineering will. "Unofficially, your government asked mine to evaluate current air defense capabilities." The silence that followed carried weight. France's military leadership had been quietly concerned about gaps in their coverage, particularly along the Spanish border where smuggling routes had become more sophisticated. But asking Americans for help meant admitting weakness, a concept that sat poorly with Gallic pride. Dubois processed implications while monitoring his fuel state. The Rafales were reaching operational limits, but protocol demanded they escort the intruder to controlled airspace. "Ghostwind, you'll accompany us to Toulouse for debriefing." Negative, Falcon lead. Different mission parameters. Kestrel's voice carried subtle authority, the kind that came from years of operations where failure meant death rather than embarrassment. "But I'll give you something for your report." The F-35 accelerated suddenly, its Pratt and Whitney engine screaming defiance at gravity and doubt. In seconds, it was supersonic, climbing toward the edge of space where only gods and astronauts dared venture. The sonic boom rolled across the mountains like thunder, echoing from peak to peak in diminishing waves. Behind her, the Rafales struggled to follow, their older engines gasping in thin air. But they tried, and Kestrel respected effort more than success. Tower control was shouting now, demanding explanations, threatening diplomatic incidents. The usual bureaucratic panic when reality refused to match paperwork. Kestrel ignored the noise, focusing on her real mission, the one written in classified orders that officially didn't exist. 3 months ago, intelligence assets had identified a new threat: hybrid warfare conducted by private military contractors using modified civilian aircraft. Not quite military, not quite terrorist, operating in legal gray zones that made traditional responses inadequate. They needed someone who understood unconventional thinking, who could operate outside normal command structures. They needed a ghost. Kestrel Voss had earned her call sign during combat operations over Syria, where she'd flown missions that existed only in heavily redacted after-action reports. Precision strikes against targets that disappeared from satellite imagery within hours. Close air support for ground units that officially weren't there. Electronic warfare against enemy systems that somehow forgot everything they'd recorded. She was a weapon designed for problems that couldn't be solved with conventional force. The F-35's displays showed new contacts, 4 aircraft climbing from Spanish airspace, moving fast and low. No transponder signals, no flight plans filed, no response to air traffic control. Exactly what she'd been waiting for. Falcon formation, this is ghost wind. We have party crashers approaching from the south. Recommend you maintain current altitude and observe. Her voice carried combat calm, the supernatural stillness that separated veterans from wannabes. Captain Dubois checked his threat display. Seeing what she saw, 4 unknowns in tactical formation, their radar signatures suggesting heavy modification. These weren't civilian aircraft anymore. Someone had turned cargo haulers into something resembling fighters, adding weapons pylons and defensive systems that wouldn't fool military inspection, but might survive long enough to complete their mission. Tower Falcon lead. We have multiple unknowns entering restricted airspace. Request immediate backup. Dubois' training kicked in, procedures overriding curiosity. The response crackled with static. Falcon lead, be advised backup is 15 minutes out. Maintain observation position. 15 minutes. In air combat, that was geological time, epochs during which entire wars could be decided. The unknowns were accelerating, their modified turboprops screaming at maximum power. Whatever they were carrying, they were desperate to deliver it. Kestrel studied the tactical picture, her mind processing possibilities like a chess grandmaster evaluating moves. The unknowns were heading for Barcelona's airspace, but their current trajectory would take them over population centers, schools, hospitals, morning commuters beginning their daily routines. Collateral damage waiting to happen. Falcon formation, recommend aggressive intercept. These contacts represent immediate threat to civilian aircraft. Her voice carried absolute certainty, the kind of conviction that made subordinates follow officers into hell. But Dubois hesitated. Rules of engagement were clear, positive identification required before weapons release. These aircraft hadn't committed any overtly hostile acts, technically speaking. They were violating airspace, but that was a diplomatic matter, not military. Kestrel understood his dilemma. Good officers followed regulations. Great officers knew when to break them. The F-35 Dove, its stealth capabilities masking approach until she was close enough to see details through her helmet display. The lead aircraft was a twin-engine transport, civilian registration obscured by matte paint. But the weapons pylons were military-grade, the electronics pods sophisticated enough to suggest serious funding. Professional work. Her targeting system locked onto the leader, missile warning indicators screaming in multiple cockpits below. The psychological effect was immediate, the formation scattered, their careful coordination dissolving into individual survival instincts. Unknown aircraft, this is French Air Force interceptor. You are ordered to land immediately at nearest suitable airfield. Acknowledge immediately or face defensive action. Dubois' transmission followed protocol perfectly, but his voice carried steel underneath diplomatic language. The response came not from radios but from weapons, air-to-air missiles launched from modified pylons, seeking heat signatures with basic but effective guidance systems. Crude compared to military hardware, but deadly enough against unaware targets. Kestrel's countermeasures deployed automatically, chaff and flares blooming like metallic flowers, confusing primitive seekers with false signatures. The F-35 twisted through 3 dimensions, its fly-by-wire controls making maneuvers that would tear conventional aircraft apart. Physics became poetry, mathematics transformed into art. The Rafales scattered, their pilots' training asserting itself as they broke formation and went defensive. Lieutenant Morrow's aircraft took the closest missile, her radar warning receiver screaming threats as she deployed her own countermeasures. The missile passed harmlessly through her chaff cloud, detonating against empty air. Falcon 3, I'm hit. Her voice carried surprise more than fear, the universal shock of combat when training met reality and discovered the difference. Negative, Sophie, check your systems. Dubois' voice was calm, professional, the reassurance of experience. That was proximity detonation, damage assessment. All systems green. Mon Dieu, that was close. Relief flooded her transmission as she realized survival wasn't theoretical anymore. The unknown aircraft were climbing now, desperation replacing tactics as they sought altitude for whatever mission drove them. But they were outmatched, civilian turboprops against military interceptors, smugglers against warriors. The outcome was inevitable. Kestrel closed distance on the leader, her F-35's cannon selected and ready. 25mm rounds that could turn aircraft into debris clouds, but she held fire. Something was wrong with this picture. The weapons pylons were empty now, missiles expended, but the aircraft continued climbing instead of running. Professional smugglers would have broken off, sought escape routes, prioritized survival over mission completion. These pilots were acting like fanatics. Her threat warning receiver lit up, surface-to-air missiles launching from the Spanish border, climbing fast with sophisticated guidance systems. Not military installations, but private security forces with money enough to buy real hardware. The pieces clicked together in her mind. This wasn't smuggling. This was distraction. All aircraft, we have SAMs inbound from multiple locations. Recommend immediate defensive maneuvers. Her transmission reached everyone, French interceptors, unknown aircraft, probably half the air traffic controllers in southwestern Europe. The first missile reached the unknown formation, detonating among them with brutal efficiency. 3 aircraft disappeared in expanding fireballs, their crews vaporized before they could scream. The fourth somehow survived, its pilot wrestling damaged controls as the aircraft fell toward Earth like a wounded bird. But the SAM sights weren't finished. More missiles climbed skyward, targeting everything with wings, military, civilian, neutral. Someone had decided that eliminating witnesses was more important than avoiding international incidents. Kestrel understood now. The unknown aircraft had been expendable from the beginning, sacrificial pawns in a larger game. Their real mission was to draw military assets into a kill zone, to test response times and procedures while eliminating anyone who might report what they'd seen. It was brilliant. It was ruthless. It was exactly the kind of thinking she'd been sent to counter. Her F-35 accelerated toward the SAM sites, its stealth coding reducing radar signature to whispers and shadows. The French Rafales followed, their pilots' survival instincts overriding everything except the fundamental military imperative. When someone shoots at you, you shoot back harder. Tower, Falcon lead. We are engaging hostile surface positions in Spanish territory. Recommend immediate diplomatic notification. Dubois' voice carried the weight of decisions that would echo in capitals across Europe. Falcon lead, you are not authorized for cross-border operations. RTB immediately. The controller's response was predictable. Bureaucracy's first instinct was always to deny reality. But Kestrel was already over the border, her targeting systems painting laser designators on missile launchers hidden among rocky outcroppings. Professional installations, military-grade equipment, but operated by contractors who'd bought expertise without wisdom. They'd revealed their positions by firing, trading tactical surprise for immediate effect. Fatal mistake. The F-35's internal weapons bay opened like a mechanical flower, revealing precision-guided munitions that could thread needles or destroy bunkers with equal efficiency. Her first strike eliminated the primary radar site, a brilliant flash followed by expanding smoke clouds as electronics worth millions dissolved into expensive garbage. The secondary sites were harder targets, mobile launchers that moved between shots. But Kestrel had been hunting adaptive enemies for 20 years, learning to think like prey while striking like predator. She'd studied how desperate men behaved under pressure, how they revealed themselves through patterns they didn't realize they were creating. The second launcher died in a canyon where its crew thought rocky walls provided protection. The third tried to flee across open ground, its camouflage useless against thermal imaging that saw through deception like X-rays through flesh. The fourth simply disappeared, not destroyed but abandoned, its crew wise enough to recognize hopeless situations. Silence settled across the electromagnetic spectrum as the last missile's guidance system went dark. No more threats, no more targets, just the eternal blue of high-altitude sky and the white peaks of mountains that had witnessed centuries of human conflict. All stations, this is Ghostwind. Threat neutralized. French aircraft are cleared to return to base. Kestrel's voice carried satisfaction mixed with something like sadness. Another problem solved through violence. Another day when peace was measured by the absence of war rather than its presence. Captain Dubois' Rafale formed up on her wing, close enough for visual contact. Through his canopy, she could see his helmet turning toward her aircraft, probably wondering who she really was beneath the call sign and classified mission parameters. Ghostwind, this is Falcon Lead. Request permission to escort you to debriefing. His voice carried professional courtesy mixed with genuine curiosity. Negative, Falcon Lead. Different mission parameters, different rules. Her F-35 began a gentle turn toward international waters, where satellites would lose track and paperwork would become conveniently vague. But tell your intelligence officers they owe me a drink. Copy that, Ghostwind, and Dubois hesitated, then continued. Professional respect, that was exceptional flying. The acknowledgement meant more than decorations or promotions. Pilots recognized skill the way musicians heard perfect pitch, instinctively, without conscious analysis. Captain Marc Dubois was paying her the highest compliment one warrior could offer another. He was admitting she was better. Merci beaucoup, mon ami. Until next time. Her transmission faded as the F-35 disappeared into morning haze, leaving only contrails and questions. Lieutenant Sophie Mara formed up on Dubois' wing as they turned toward home. Captain, who was that really? Dubois considered the question while checking fuel states and reviewing engagement reports. The official answer would be classified, buried in files that existed only in secure servers. The real answer was more complex. Legends weren't born from single encounters but from accumulated mysteries that grew in telling. Someone we're lucky to have on our side, Lieutenant. Someone who remembers what we're supposed to be protecting. His voice carried the weight of understanding earned through combat, the recognition that peace was maintained by people willing to fight for it in shadows. The Rafales descended toward Toulouse, their engines trailing vapor in the thin air. Below them, civilian traffic continued its daily patterns, commercial airliners following prescribed routes, private aircraft conducting ordinary business, the vast aerial ballet that connected continents and carried human dreams across impossible distances. None of them would ever know how close they'd come to disaster, how easily their morning routines could have become memorial services. That was the nature of successful operations. Preventing wars was always less dramatic than winning them. In her F-35, climbing toward the stratosphere where atmosphere became space, Kestrel Voss reviewed the engagement with professional satisfaction. The threat had been neutralized, international incidents avoided, civilian casualties prevented. Success measured in what didn't happen rather than what did. But questions remained. The SAM sites had been too sophisticated for simple smugglers, the coordination too precise for amateurs. Someone with serious resources was testing European air defenses, probing for weaknesses that could be exploited later. Today's operation was reconnaissance, not the main event. Her secure communication system activated, encrypted channels carrying new orders from distant commanders. Another crisis brewing, another problem requiring unconventional solutions. The life of a military ghost, perpetually deployed, eternally vigilant, forever fighting wars that couldn't be acknowledged. She banked toward the next mission, contrails painting temporary signatures across unlimited sky. 3 weeks later, the story had already begun changing in squadron-ready rooms across NATO bases. Details shifted with each telling. The unknown aircraft became enemy fighters. The SAM sites grew into full air defense networks. The single F-35 multiplied into entire squadrons. Legends were like that, improving with age like wine or whiskey. But Captain Mark Dubois stuck to facts when filing his official report, though he admitted certain elements remained unexplained. The pilot known as Ghostwind had demonstrated capabilities that suggested advanced training and extensive combat experience. Her aircraft's performance exceeded published specifications, indicating either superior maintenance or modifications that weren't reflected in technical manuals. Most significantly, her tactical awareness had been supernatural, recognizing threats before they manifested, understanding enemy intentions before they declared themselves. That kind of intuition couldn't be taught in flight schools or learned from textbooks. It was earned through survival, refined through repetition, perfected through necessity. Lieutenant Sophie Morrow requested transfer to Special Operations after her encounter, claiming she wanted to learn from pilots who understood warfare as art rather than science. Her application was approved, though she would discover that finding Ghostwind again wasn't possible through normal channels. The French intelligence services opened a file on the incident, cross-referencing it with similar encounters reported by other NATO partners. A pattern emerged: mysterious aircraft appearing during international crises, unknown pilots providing assistance that couldn't be officially acknowledged, problems being solved by people who didn't seem to exist. The Americans, when diplomatically queried, maintained their traditional position. Operational security prevented discussion of classified programs, which could mean anything or nothing, depending on interpretation. But in the secure communications networks that connected Allied intelligence services, a different story circulated. Someone was operating in the gray zones between war and peace, handling problems that couldn't be addressed through conventional military action. A ghost in the machine, a shadow on the wall, a whisper in the electronic noise that surrounded modern warfare. They called her Ghostwind, though few believed that was her real name. They knew she flew an F-35 Lightning with capabilities that exceeded factory specifications. They understood she operated under authority that transcended national boundaries, answering to commanders whose identities remained classified above their security clearances. What they didn't know was why she'd chosen that particular call sign, or what personal history had shaped her into someone capable of treating war like a chess game played at light speed. Those answers belonged to her alone, buried in memories that couldn't be shared without compromising operations that officially didn't exist. But stories had a way of finding truth, even when truth was hidden behind layers of classification and denial. Squadron leader Kestrel Voss, the woman behind the call sign, had earned her wings during a different kind of war, when enemies wore uniforms and battles had clear objectives. She'd flown her first combat mission 23 years ago, fresh from pilot training and full of idealistic certainty about good and evil, right and wrong. That certainty had died over Baghdad, when her F-16 Falcon had delivered precision-guided munitions against a target that turned out to be a school sheltering refugees. Intelligence had been wrong, coordinates had been confused, innocent people had paid for mistakes made by officials who would never face consequences for their errors. She'd completed the mission because orders were orders, then requested immediate transfer to the most dangerous assignment available. If she was going to carry the weight of civilian casualties, she reasoned, she might as well ensure they served some meaningful purpose. Special Operations had welcomed her. Pilots with her skill level and psychological profile were rare commodities. She'd learned to fly aircraft that didn't officially exist, to conduct missions that disappeared from official records, to live with secrets that couldn't be shared with family or friends who wouldn't understand why she chose to serve in shadows rather than sunshine. The call sign had come later, during operations over Afghanistan, when her squadron commander noted her ability to appear and disappear without detection. "You're like a ghost in the wind," he'd said. "There one moment, gone the next." The name had stuck, evolving through years of classified operations until it became her identity more than her given name. Now, approaching middle age in a profession that valued youth, she found herself questioning choices that had once seemed inevitable. Military service was supposed to be temporary, a few years of adventure before settling into civilian life with skills and benefits earned through service. But some people discovered they were better at war than peace, more comfortable in cockpits than living rooms. She was flying home from her latest mission, another crisis averted, another problem solved through the application of controlled violence, when her secure phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. Text appeared on her cockpit display, encrypted communication from commanders whose names she'd never learned. "Package delivery required. Coordinates follow. Priority 1." Priority 1 meant someone important was in trouble, probably behind enemy lines, definitely in need of extraction or elimination. The kind of mission that appeared in action movies, but rarely in real life, where success was measured by body counts and failure meant international incidents. She altered course toward the new coordinates, somewhere in the mountains between Afghanistan and Pakistan, where borders were suggestions and governments were temporary conveniences. Dangerous country, populated by people who'd been fighting wars since before America existed. Perfect place for a ghost to disappear permanently. The coordinates led to a valley where satellite imagery showed nothing but rocks and shadows, but Kestrel's instruments detected electronic signatures that suggested sophisticated installations hidden beneath natural camouflage. Someone had spent serious money making this place invisible to conventional surveillance. Her secure communication system activated. "Ghostwind, this is Overwatch. Package is 1 click north of your current position. Grid square 41 SMB 12345. High-value target, extreme prejudice authorized." Extreme prejudice. Military euphemism for assassination, the kind of mission that separated professionals from amateurs. Someone had decided that a particular person's continued existence posed unacceptable risks to national security, and diplomacy wouldn't solve the problem. Kestrel's F-35 descended into the valley like a metallic bird of prey, its stealth coating reducing radar signature to whispers. Below, she could see the target compound, concrete buildings disguised as natural formations, satellite dishes hidden among rock outcroppings, vehicle tracks that led nowhere on official maps. Professional work, but not perfect. Thermal imaging revealed heat signatures that suggested underground facilities, probably connected by tunnels that would complicate any ground assault. Airstrikes would be ineffective against hardened targets, but precision weapons could eliminate specific individuals without destroying valuable intelligence. Her targeting system locked onto the primary building, where thermal signatures indicated human presence. The laser designator painted invisible crosshairs on concrete walls that had sheltered terrorists, arms dealers, and worse things that operated in the gray zones between civilization and chaos. Overwatch Ghostwind. Target acquired, payload ready for delivery. Her voice carried professional calm, the supernatural stillness that separated veterans from wannabes. "Ghostwind Overwatch, you are cleared hot. Repeat, you are cleared hot." The F-35's weapons bay opened, revealing a single precision-guided munition that could thread needles or destroy bunkers with equal efficiency. Kestrel's finger moved toward the release switch, muscle memory trained through thousands of hours of simulation and dozens of real-world applications. Then she saw the children. Thermal imaging revealed small heat signatures moving through the compound, Kids playing in courtyards, running between buildings, living ordinary lives in extraordinary circumstances. Intelligence hadn't mentioned civilians, but intelligence was often incomplete, sometimes wrong, occasionally fabricated by people with agendas that didn't match reality. Overwatch, Ghostwind. I have multiple civilian signatures in the target area. Request clarification of rules of engagement. Silence stretched across encrypted channels while distant commanders consulted classified documents and calculated acceptable casualty ratios. Political mathematics where human lives became statistics in equations that balanced strategic objectives against moral complications. Ghostwind Overwatch. Mission parameters unchanged. Package delivery authorized. The response was predictable. Operational security trumped humanitarian concerns. Strategic objectives outweighed individual lives. Children were unfortunate but acceptable losses in wars that couldn't be officially acknowledged. Kestrel's finger hesitated above the weapon release switch. 23 years of military service had taught her to follow orders without question, to trust commanders who possessed information she couldn't access. But 23 years of combat experience had also taught her to recognize when orders were wrong. Overwatch Ghostwind. Negative on package delivery. Too many innocents in the blast radius. The response was immediate and harsh. Ghostwind, you are ordered to complete the mission. Failure to comply will result in court-martial proceedings. Court-martial. Military justice for military crimes, where disobedience was treason and conscience was weakness. Kestrel had seen good officers destroyed by systems that valued compliance over competence, obedience over ethics. But she'd also seen too many children die, because adults couldn't find better ways to solve their problems. Overwatch Ghostwind. I'm aborting the mission. Find another solution. Her voice carried finality, the absolute certainty of someone who'd reached their personal line and refused to cross it. The secure channel erupted with threats and accusations, career destruction, criminal prosecution, permanent exile from military service. The usual consequences for people who valued morality over orders, who remembered that soldiers were supposed to protect innocents rather than eliminate them. Kestrel listened to the tirade while circling the compound, watching children play games that would continue regardless of adult conflicts. Their laughter couldn't reach her through the cockpit canopy, but she imagined it anyway, the universal sound of youth refusing to be destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. Overwatch, this is Ghostwind. I'm going home. She switched off the secure communication system and turned toward international airspace, leaving the valley and its secrets to other people with different consciences. Behind her, the compound continued its ordinary activities, terrorists planning operations, children playing games, adults making choices that would echo through history in ways they couldn't imagine. The target would survive to fight another day, but the children would also survive to grow into whatever the future held for them. Kestrel considered it a fair trade. The consequences were swift and predictable. By the time she landed at her home base, military police were waiting with arrest warrants and legal documents that would transform her from pilot to defendant. Disobeying direct orders during combat operations was treason, regardless of moral justifications or humanitarian concerns. Her court-martial was conducted in closed session, classified testimony from witnesses whose names couldn't be revealed. The prosecution presented evidence of insubordination, dereliction of duty, and violation of military oath. The defense argued temporary insanity caused by combat stress, but psychiatric evaluations found her competent and rational. The verdict was inevitable, guilty on all charges. The sentence was harsh but not unexpected: dismissal from service, forfeiture of all benefits, permanent banishment from military installations. 23 years of exemplary service erased by one moment of conscience. But military justice operated in mysterious ways. Her dismissal was classified, her service record sealed, her existence effectively erased from official databases. As far as the United States Air Force was concerned, Squadron Leader Kestrel Voss had never existed, which made her perfect for certain types of employment. The job offer arrived 3 months after her court-martial, delivered through intermediaries who represented clients whose identities couldn't be revealed. Private military contractors needed pilots with her experience and psychological profile, people who could operate independently, make decisions under pressure, and live with consequences that couldn't be shared with civilian friends or family. The pay was excellent, the benefits substantial, the working conditions dangerous enough to eliminate applicants who weren't serious about the profession. Most importantly, the missions were chosen by people who understood that sometimes doing the right thing required breaking the wrong rules. She accepted, trading military rank for civilian employment, official recognition for anonymous effectiveness. The transition was surprisingly easy. Different uniforms, different commanders, same fundamental mission of protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. The F-35 Lightning she'd flown during her final military mission was officially retired, its airframe recycled into spare parts for aircraft that still served active squadrons. But certain components, engines, avionics, weapons systems, disappeared into civilian markets where wealthy clients could acquire military capabilities without military oversight. Her new employers owned such an aircraft, modified for operations that couldn't be conducted by official military units. The same F-35 she'd flown as a military officer, now serving civilian purposes that aligned more closely with her personal ethics than official policies had. It was poetic justice, she supposed. The aircraft that had ended her military career would now continue it under different auspices, serving the same fundamental mission through different chains of command. The work was exactly what she'd expected: crisis response in places where governments couldn't or wouldn't act, problems solved through the application of precisely calibrated violence, peace maintained by people willing to fight for it in shadows. Everything she'd done as a military officer, but with better pay and fewer moral compromises. Her first assignment had been the French border incident that earned her recognition from Captain Marc Dubois and his squadron. Professional pilot acknowledging professional pilot, warrior respecting warrior, the universal language of competence that transcended national boundaries and organizational affiliations. Since then, she'd flown dozens of missions across 6 continents, solving problems that ranged from hostage rescue to precision strikes against high-value targets. Each success built her reputation among people who measured effectiveness by results rather than regulations. The call sign had followed her from military to civilian service, becoming her primary identity in a profession where real names were security risks. Ghostwind, the pilot who appeared when needed, accomplished impossible missions, then disappeared without seeking credit or recognition. It was a comfortable existence, she discovered. Purpose without politics, action without bureaucracy, service without the institutional compromises that had ultimately driven her from official military channels. She was still protecting innocence and eliminating threats, but now she chose her battles rather than accepting orders from commanders whose judgment she questioned. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd become more effective as a civilian contractor than she'd ever been as a military officer, freed from regulations that often prevented good people from doing necessary work. The court-martial that ended her official career had actually liberated her to serve more effectively. But success in private military work brought its own complications. Her reputation had attracted attention from intelligence services, criminal organizations, and governments that preferred to hire mercenaries rather than risk their own personnel. The job offers were increasingly lucrative and decreasingly ethical. She turned down contracts to eliminate political dissidents, terrorize civilian populations, and support dictatorships that oppress their own people. Money was important, but some prices were too high for any rational person to pay. Which brought her to the present mission. Another crisis brewing in international waters where territorial claims overlapped, and legal jurisdiction was deliberately vague. Her current employers represented an oil consortium that needed security for drilling operations in disputed territory, protection from pirates, terrorists, and governmental forces that might interfere with profitable extraction. Legitimate business, or so they claimed. Environmental groups would disagree, but environmental groups weren't paying her salary. The flight to the operational area took 6 hours through international airspace, her F-35 invisible to military radars that tracked official aircraft but ignored civilian contractors. Below, the ocean stretched like liquid metal under cloudless sky, unmarked by human presence except for the occasional cargo ship following ancient trade routes. Her destination was an artificial island built on a submerged reef, concrete and steel rising from water too deep for natural foundations. Engineering triumph or environmental disaster, depending on perspective. The oil consortium had spent billions creating a platform that could extract petroleum from seabed deposits while theoretically complying with international maritime law. Theory and practice were often different things. As her F-35 approached the platform, Kestrel's threat detection systems activated, surface-to-air missiles, radar installations, electronic warfare equipment that could disable aircraft or communications. The oil consortium had armed their artificial island like a military base, claiming self-defense while creating offensive capabilities that exceeded most national navies. Artificial island control. This is Ghostwind requesting permission to land. Her transmission followed civilian aviation protocol, polite but professional. Ghostwind, island control. You are cleared for vertical landing on Platform 7. Welcome aboard. The controller's voice carried American accent mixed with international experience, probably a contractor like herself, military veteran earning civilian wages in private service. The F-35's lift fan activated, rotating engine thrust downward in a ballet of engineering that defied gravity through brute force and precise control. Kestrel felt the aircraft settle onto the platform with mechanical precision, landing gear absorbing impact, while automated systems secured her fighter to the deck. The artificial island sprawled around her landing pad like a metallic city floating on endless ocean. Drilling towers rose like steel cathedrals, their tops crowned with flares that burned excess gas in pillars of orange flame. The constant roar of machinery mixed with ocean waves, creating an industrial symphony that never stopped. She shut down the F-35 systems methodically, muscle memory guiding her through procedures that had become second nature. External power connected automatically, fuel lines coupled with hydraulic precision. Weapons bay remained sealed pending security clearance. Her aircraft would be ready for immediate launch if circumstances required rapid departure. The platform's security chief was waiting as she climbed down from the cockpit, a weathered man in his 50s, with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades making hard decisions under pressure. Former military, obviously, probably special operations judging by the way he assessed threats that weren't immediately visible. Ms. Voss, welcome to Neptune's Pride. I'm Colonel Jackson Hayes, Platform Security Director. His handshake was firm without being aggressive, professional without being friendly. Your reputation precedes you. Reputation can be misleading, Colonel. What's the actual situation here? Kestrel's voice carried the directness of someone who valued facts over flattery. Hayes gestured toward the platform's superstructure, indicating they should continue their conversation away from curious ears. 3 weeks ago, we detected unauthorized submersibles in our operational area. Yesterday, one of our supply ships reported being shadowed by unidentified aircraft. This morning, Our communications were jammed for 47 minutes. Sounds like someone's testing your defenses. Any idea who? Several possibilities. Environmental terrorists who want to shut down our operations. Competing oil companies trying to steal our exploration data. Regional governments claiming territorial jurisdiction they don't legally possess. Hayes's tone suggested he considered all options equally problematic. They walked through corridors that felt more like military installations than civilian facilities. Blast doors, security checkpoints, armed guards who nodded respectfully but kept weapons ready. The oil consortium had built their artificial island to withstand more than ocean storms. "What's my specific mission, Colonel?" Kestrel asked as they entered a briefing room dominated by tactical displays showing real-time surveillance data. "Reconnaissance initially. We need to identify who's threatening our operations and assess their capabilities. If threats escalate to active interference, you're authorized to respond with appropriate force." Hayes activated the displays, revealing radar tracks and sonar contacts that painted a picture of increasing hostile activity. Kestrel studied the data with professional interest. The pattern was familiar: probe missions designed to map defensive capabilities, electronic warfare testing response times, psychological pressure building toward eventual confrontation. Someone was preparing for military action disguised as civilian protest. "Timeline for escalation?" she asked. "Intelligence estimates suggest we have 72 hours before they attempt direct action against our facilities. After that, it becomes open warfare." Hayes's expression was grim but determined. "The consortium has invested too much in this project to abandon it because of threats." Kestrel nodded understanding. Billions of dollars in investment created its own momentum, economic gravity, that pulled everything toward conflict when diplomacy failed. The oil would be extracted regardless of environmental concerns or territorial disputes. The only question was how much violence would be required. "I'll need complete access to your intelligence files and operational authority over defensive assets." Her terms were non-negotiable. She couldn't protect something she didn't understand completely. "Agreed. Your security clearance has been updated accordingly." Hayes handed her a tablet containing encrypted files that would reveal exactly what she was defending and why it was worth fighting for. The briefing materials made sobering reading. Neptune's Pride wasn't just an oil platform. It was the prototype for deep ocean extraction technology that could access petroleum deposits previously considered unreachable. Success here would open entire ocean floors to resource extraction, changing global energy markets and potentially destabilizing nations that depended on traditional oil exports. Environmental impact assessments were classified, but leaked documents suggested catastrophic damage to marine ecosystems. The drilling process required chemical dispersants that would contaminate thousands of square miles of ocean, killing everything from plankton to whales. Profits would be enormous, ecological costs incalculable. Kestrel felt familiar moral tension. Her job was protecting the platform, but part of her sympathized with people trying to stop it. Environmental protection was important, but stopping terrorism was also important. The intersection of competing values where good people could honestly disagree about proper courses of action. Professional ethics required her to complete contracted missions regardless of personal opinions. She'd been hired to defend Neptune's Pride, not to judge its environmental impact or economic necessity. Other people made those decisions. Her job was ensuring they could implement them without facing violence. Her quarters were Spartan but comfortable, military-style efficiency adapted for civilian use. The porthole provided spectacular ocean views, endless blue horizon broken only by occasional clouds that cast moving shadows on water surface. Beautiful and deadly, like most things worth protecting. She spent the evening reviewing intelligence files and defensive preparations, familiarizing herself with platform capabilities and potential vulnerabilities. The artificial island's weapons systems were impressive: surface-to-air missiles, anti-ship torpedoes, electronic warfare equipment that could blind satellites or disable aircraft. But sophisticated hardware required sophisticated operators, and private military contractors weren't always equivalent to military personnel. Her secure phone buzzed with encrypted messages from other contractors working similar assignments, rumors of coordinated attacks against offshore installations, warnings about new terrorist tactics, intelligence reports suggesting state-sponsored sabotage disguised as environmental activism. The threats against Neptune's pride weren't isolated incidents, but part of larger campaigns aimed at disrupting global energy markets. That changed the calculus significantly. Environmental protesters were one thing: idealistic but generally nonviolent people who could be deterred through demonstration of superior force. State-sponsored terrorists were different: professional operators with military training and unlimited resources, willing to accept casualties that environmentalists would find unacceptable. Kestrel activated her personal communication system, sending coded messages to contacts throughout the private military industry. If this was coordinated state action, she needed information about similar incidents and response strategies that had proven effective. Professional networks were invaluable for sharing intelligence that governments couldn't or wouldn't provide. The responses confirmed her suspicions. Multiple offshore installations had reported similar harassment patterns: probe missions, electronic warfare, psychological pressure building toward direct confrontation. But no actual attacks yet, suggesting someone was still hopping to achieve objectives through intimidation rather than violence. That meant there was still time for diplomatic solutions, though diplomacy wasn't her specialty. Her job was ensuring that failure of peaceful negotiations didn't result in successful terrorist attacks. Dawn brought new intelligence: satellite imagery showing naval vessels massing near the platform's operational area, ostensibly conducting training exercises but actually positioning for potential blockade operations. Too many ships, too well coordinated, too conveniently located to be coincidental. Colonel Hayes briefed the morning staff meeting with professional calm that didn't quite hide underlying tension. Intelligence indicates possible naval blockade within 48 hours. All non-essential personnel will be evacuated via helicopter beginning at 800 hours. What's the legal status of blockade operations in international waters? Asked the platform manager, a civilian engineer who understood drilling technology but not military tactics. Legally ambiguous, practically irrelevant, Hayes replied. If they choose to interfere with our operations, we'll respond according to contracted security protocols. Kestrel studied the naval disposition through satellite feeds, recognizing professional formations that indicated serious military planning. These weren't terrorists or environmental activists. This was governmental action disguised as civilian protest, backed by naval forces that could overwhelm the platform's defenses through sheer numbers. Colonel, recommend we request immediate diplomatic intervention through consortium channels. This is escalating beyond private security capabilities. Her assessment was professional and objective. When facing superior forces, smart tactics involve changing the rules of engagement. Diplomatic efforts are ongoing, but results aren't guaranteed. We need to be prepared for military action regardless of political solutions. Hayes's tone suggested he'd already written off diplomacy as ineffective against determined adversaries. The evacuation proceeded smoothly, helicopters ferrying non-combat personnel to cargo ships positioned beyond the potential conflict zone. Essential operations continued with skeleton crews, drilling supervisor, communications technicians, security personnel, and one civilian contractor, whose aircraft provided their only hope of achieving tactical parity against superior numbers. By noon, Neptune's pride had transformed from industrial facility into military fortress. Weapons systems were activated, defensive positions manned, communications gear switched to encrypted military frequencies. The artificial island was ready for siege. Kestrel performed final checks on her F-35, ensuring all systems were operational and weapons loads optimized for the expected threat profile. Air-to-surface missiles for attacking naval vessels, air-to-air missiles for defending against helicopters or transport aircraft, electronic warfare pods for disrupting enemy communications and guidance systems. Her fighter was configured for maximum combat effectiveness, but one aircraft against multiple naval vessels wasn't sustainable. She could inflict significant damage initially, but prolonged engagement would inevitably result in defeat through attrition. Success depended on achieving strategic objectives quickly, before enemy numbers became overwhelming. Ghostwind, this is island control. We have multiple surface contacts approaching from 3 directions. Recommend immediate launch for reconnaissance mission. The controller's voice carried urgency mixed with professional calm. Island control, Ghostwind. Roger, launching immediately. Kestrel's F-35 lifted off vertically, hover capability allowing departure without runway requirements that would complicate combat operations. The ocean surface below revealed the magnitude of opposition. 12 naval vessels in coordinated formation, approaching from different directions to complicate defensive targeting. Destroyers, frigates, patrol boats, and support vessels carrying landing craft that could deliver assault troops directly to the platform. Professional planning, overwhelming force, timing coordinated to achieve maximum tactical surprise. Someone had spent months preparing this operation, studying the platform's defensive capabilities and developing strategies to neutralize them systematically. Her threat warning receiver lit up as surface-to-air missiles locked onto her aircraft, military-grade systems that confirmed state sponsorship of the attacking force. Environmental activists didn't have access to naval air defense networks. Island control, Ghostwind. Confirming hostile intent from multiple naval vessels. They're painting me with fire control radar. Her transmission would be recorded for legal purposes, establishing that the attacking force had demonstrated aggressive action first. Ghostwind Island Control. You are authorized to engage targets of opportunity. Repeat, weapons are free. The F-35 dove toward the nearest destroyer, its stealth capabilities masking approach until weapons range. Kestrel's targeting system locked onto the warship's bridge superstructure, laser designation painting invisible crosshairs on steel that housed command and control systems. Her first missile struck the destroyer's radar array, eliminating its ability to coordinate air defense for the formation. The second missile penetrated the bridge, destroying communications equipment and probably killing officers responsible for tactical command. Within 30 seconds, the lead vessel was effectively neutralized as a combat unit. But 11 ships remained, and they were spreading formation to complicate her targeting solutions. Professional response to superior air power, disperse forces, present multiple targets, force the enemy to choose priorities while maintaining collective defensive capability. The nearest frigate launched surface-to-air missiles, sophisticated seekers that required active maneuvering to avoid. Kestrel's F-35 twisted through 3 dimensions, countermeasures blooming like metallic flowers as she sought position for counterattack. The missiles passed harmlessly through chaff clouds, detonating against empty air. Her return strike eliminated the frigate's weapons systems, reducing another warship to floating scrap metal. But the engagement had consumed precious time and ammunition, resources she couldn't afford to waste against overwhelming numbers. Island control, Ghostwind. I'm engaging targets of opportunity, but recommend immediate diplomatic intervention. This force is too large for single aircraft to neutralize effectively. Ghostwind Island Control. Diplomatic channels are active, but expect continued engagement until political solutions are achieved. Diplomatic channels. Military euphemism for desperate phone calls between officials who were probably more concerned about political consequences than tactical realities. Politicians would negotiate while soldiers fought, the eternal pattern of conflict where those who made decisions rarely faced their consequences personally. Kestrel selected her next target, a patrol boat that was launching small craft toward the platform. Landing parties meant immediate threat to personnel who couldn't be evacuated, civilians whose survival depended on her ability to sink transport vessels before troops reached the artificial island. The patrol boat disappeared in a brilliant explosion as her missile found its fuel storage, secondary detonations, ripping the hull apart in expanding waves of flame and smoke. The small craft scattered, their crews suddenly aware that approaching Neptune's pride meant facing someone with superior firepower and willingness to use it. But her weapons load was diminishing rapidly, and the remaining naval vessels were adapting their tactics to exploit her limitations. They couldn't shoot her down easily, but they could force her to expend missiles against targets that weren't critical to their mission success. Island Control, this is Ghostwind. I need immediate weapons resupply. Current loadout won't sustain extended engagement. Her transmission was matter-of-fact, professional assessment of tactical realities. Ghostwind Island Control. Negative on resupply. No additional weapons available aboard platform. Of course, private military contractors operated with limited logistics, unlike military forces that could call upon unlimited resources from national arsenals. She would have to make her remaining missiles count, choosing targets that would disrupt enemy operations most effectively. The largest vessel, a destroyer positioned to provide command and control for the entire formation, became her priority target. Eliminating flag command would disrupt coordination, forcing individual ships to operate independently rather than as coordinated force. Professional tactics aimed at achieving maximum strategic effect with limited resources. Her approach was complicated by concentrated anti-aircraft fire from multiple ships, tracers painting geometric patterns against blue sky as desperate gunners tried to connect with supersonic target. The F-35's stealth capabilities reduced their effectiveness, but quantity had quality of its own. Enough bullets could eventually find their mark through statistical probability. The destroyer's bridge superstructure erupted in flames as her missile found its target, secondary explosions suggesting she'd struck ammunition storage or fuel systems. The warship began listing immediately, its crew abandoning coordinated operations in favor of damage control and survival. Victory but Pyrrhic. Her last missile was gone, and 10 enemy vessels remained operational. The F-35 still had its internal cannon, but 25 rounds were ineffective against armored warships. She could strafe small boats and landing craft, but couldn't significantly damage major combatants. Island Control, Ghostwind. I'm Winchester on missiles, continuing engagement with cannon. Military terminology that meant she was out of her primary weapons but still committed to the fight. Ghostwind Island Control, Roger Winchester. Be advised friendly forces inbound from the north. Friendly forces. Kestrel's threat display lit up with new contacts, aircraft approaching from international airspace, military transponders broadcasting identification codes that indicated official governmental support. Someone had finally decided that private military action required public military response. The arriving aircraft were FA-18 Super Hornets, their distinctive twin-engine silhouettes unmistakable against morning sky. United States Navy, probably launched from carrier, positioned beyond radar horizon. Real military power brought to bear on behalf of civilian contractors who'd paid for governmental protection. Unidentified aircraft, this is Navy Flight Leader Fury 1. State your intentions and identify yourself immediately. The transmission was professional but carried underlying threat: comply or face consequences from people with unlimited ammunition. Fury 1, this is Ghostwind. Private military contractor defending Neptune's Pride platform from hostile naval forces. Request immediate assistance against superior numbers. Ghostwind, Fury 1. Understand you're defending American-flagged installation. We're here to provide support. What's your current tactical situation? Kestrel quickly briefed the Navy pilots on enemy dispositions, her own ammunition status, and immediate threats to the platform. Professional communication between warriors who understood that survival depended on accurate information and coordinated tactics. The Super Hornets spread into attack formation, their weapons bays loaded with missiles specifically designed for anti-ship operations. Harpoon anti-ship missiles, Sidewinder air-to-air missiles, electronic warfare pods that could disrupt enemy communications and targeting systems. Everything she'd needed but couldn't carry in sufficient quantity. All aircraft, this is Fury 1. We are engaging hostile naval forces threatening American commercial installation. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. Repeat, weapons-free. The naval battle that followed was swift and decisive. Professional military pilots with unlimited weapons loads against naval vessels that had been designed for coastal patrol rather than fleet engagement. The outcome was never in doubt, only the duration of resistance. Within 20 minutes, the attacking force was eliminated or fleeing toward territorial waters where pursuit would create diplomatic incidents. Burning wrecks marked positions where warships had challenged superior air power and lost, their crews rescued by vessels that withdrew rather than face similar fates. Neptune's Pride emerged from the engagement damaged but operational, its defensive systems proven effective against terrorist attack, but inadequate against military action. The artificial island would need permanent military protection if operations were to continue in disputed waters. Ghostwind, Fury 1. Nice work defending the platform. Your tactics were sound given the limitations you faced. The Navy flight leader's transmission carried professional respect, pilot acknowledging pilot regardless of organizational differences. Fury 1, Ghostwind. Appreciate the backup. Solo operations have their limitations. Kestrel's response was equally professional, though privately she wondered what would have happened if governmental support had arrived too late. The Super Hornets formed up on her F-35. As they returned to the platform, mixed formation of military and civilian aircraft, united by successful completion of dangerous mission. Political boundaries mattered less than professional competence when lives depended on coordination and skill. Colonel Hayes was waiting when she landed, his expression mixing relief with satisfaction. Outstanding work, Ghostwind. Your defense bought us time for diplomatic intervention, and your tactical assessments were accurate throughout the engagement. Thank you, Colonel. What's the long-term security situation? Today's attack suggests this won't be the last attempt. Kestrel's question was practical. Successful defense of one attack didn't guarantee permanent security. Consortium is negotiating permanent naval protection through governmental channels. Private military contractors like yourself will continue providing rapid response capabilities, but major threats will be handled by official military forces. Hayes's explanation suggested someone had finally recognized that billion-dollar installations required billion-dollar protection. The debriefing session lasted 3 hours, her tactical decisions analyzed by intelligence officers who would incorporate lessons learned into defensive protocols for similar installations. Every engagement provided data that could prevent future casualties, information that was invaluable for protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Her performance evaluation was excellent, naturally. Successful defense against overwhelming odds, minimal civilian casualties, strategic objectives achieved despite tactical limitations. The kind of mission that built reputations among people who measured success by survival rather than politics. But Kestrel felt familiar discomfort with assignments that placed her in morally ambiguous situations. Neptune's pride was legitimate business, but its environmental impact was devastating. The attacking force had used military violence, but their underlying concerns about ecological damage were valid. Success in combat didn't resolve ethical complications that made modern warfare more complex than simple good versus evil narratives. She submitted her final report and prepared for departure. Her contract completed successfully but not satisfyingly. Protecting billion-dollar installations from terrorist attack was important work, but it wasn't the same as protecting innocent people from military aggression. The distinction mattered to her, even if it didn't matter to people who paid her salary. Her secure phone buzzed with new job offers, similar missions for similar clients, private military work in gray zones where governmental action wasn't possible or advisable. Lucrative opportunities for someone with her skills and security clearance, though increasingly divorced from the idealistic motivations that had originally driven her to military service. She was becoming a gun for hire, she realized. Skilled professional selling expertise to highest bidders, serving causes she didn't necessarily believe in because the money was excellent and alternatives were limited. Not exactly what she'd imagined when she'd first sworn military oath 23 years ago. The flight home took 8 hours through international airspace, her F-35 invisible to military radars that tracked official aircraft but ignored civilian contractors. Below, the ocean stretched like liquid metal under starlit sky, unmarked by human conflict except for occasional oil slicks that marked positions where warships had died. She was exhausted but alert, adrenaline from combat slowly fatting into professional satisfaction mixed with personal unease. Another successful mission, another problem solved through controlled violence, another day when peace was measured by absence of war rather than presence of justice. But questions lingered about the path her career had taken, the gradual shift from idealistic service to pragmatic employment. Military officers served causes larger than themselves. Private contractors served clients who could afford their rates. The distinction was subtle but significant, especially for someone who'd originally joined the military to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Her destination was a private airfield in Nevada, where her aircraft would be maintained, and her next assignment determined by employers whose identities she'd never learned. Anonymous effectiveness in service of undefined objectives, the modern evolution of ancient mercenary traditions adapted for technological warfare. Landing was routine, ground crews efficient, debriefing minimal. Her employers were satisfied with results achieved, unconcerned with methods employed or personal costs incurred. Professional relationship based on competence rather than loyalty, pragmatic arrangement that served both parties' interests without emotional complications. But as she walked toward her quarters, Kestrel found herself wondering what her younger self would think of the woman she'd become. 23 years ago, she'd been an idealistic pilot determined to serve her country and protect innocent people. Now she was a cynical contractor serving clients whose objectives sometimes conflicted with public good. The transformation hadn't been sudden or dramatic, just gradual accommodation to realities that were more complex than training had suggested. Every compromise had seemed reasonable at the time, every ethical concession justified by circumstances that demanded practical solutions rather than idealistic purity. But accumulated compromises had consequences she was discovering. Small moral concessions became larger ones, temporary pragmatism became permanent cynicism, and service to larger causes became employment for personal profit. The slippery slope was real, and she was sliding down it despite her best intentions to maintain ethical standards. Her secure phone buzzed again, Another job offer, another crisis requiring unconventional solutions, another opportunity to apply military skills to civilian problems. The money was excellent, the work was interesting, and the alternatives were limited for someone with her particular combination of experience and legal complications. She stared at the message for several minutes, weighing options that were becoming increasingly narrow. Accept the assignment and continue down the path toward pure mercenary work, or find some way to return to service that aligned with her original motivations for military careers. The decision would define her future more than she realized. 3 days later, the answer came from an unexpected source. Her former squadron commander, the man who'd originally given her the Ghostwind call sign, appeared at her Nevada quarters with an offer that would change everything. Colonel Michael Torres looked older than she remembered, gray threading through his dark hair, but his eyes still carried the intensity that had made him legendary among pilots who'd served under his command. "Kestrel, you look like hell," he said by way of greeting, settling into the chair across from her desk without invitation. "Private military work isn't agreeing with you." "Hello, Mike," still charming as ever. Her response was dry but affectionate. Torres had been more than a commanding officer. He'd been a mentor who'd shaped her understanding of what military service could accomplish when properly directed. "I have a proposition for you, something that might restore your faith in what we're supposed to be doing with these skills." He activated a secure tablet, displaying classified documents that outlined a new program she'd never heard of. The initiative was called Guardian Angel, an international coalition of military pilots operating under NATO authority but outside normal command structures. Their mission was humanitarian intervention in crisis zones, where governmental action was impossible due to political complications or legal restrictions. Officially, they didn't exist. Practically, they were the last resort for people facing genocide, terrorism, or oppression that international law couldn't address. "Why me?" Kestrel asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Because you've proven you'll do the right thing even when it costs you everything. Because you understand how to operate independently without losing sight of larger objectives. Because you're one of the few pilots alive with enough experience to handle missions where failure means thousands of innocent people die." Tor's voice carried absolute certainty, the conviction of someone who'd spent years identifying candidates for impossible assignments. The Guardian Angel program operated from hidden bases scattered across 6 continents, their existence known only to intelligence services that provided logistical support without official acknowledgement. Pilots were recruited from military forces worldwide, but only after they demonstrated both exceptional skill and unshakable moral commitment. "What kind of missions?" she asked, though part of her already knew she would accept regardless of the answer. "Yesterday, we prevented genocide in South Sudan by eliminating militia leaders who were organizing mass killings. Last week, we extracted humanitarian workers from Afghanistan before Taliban forces could execute them for providing medical care to women. Tomorrow, we're probably going to stop chemical weapons attacks against civilians in Syria." Tor's examples were delivered matter-of-factly, as if preventing atrocities was routine business rather than extraordinary heroism. Pay, the question was automatic, though money had become less important than purpose. "Enough to live comfortably, not enough to get rich. This isn't about profit, Kestrel. This is about using your skills to protect people who have no other protection." His answer was exactly what she'd expected. Guardian Angel pilots served for reasons that transcended financial compensation. She accepted immediately, surprising herself with the speed of her decision. After months of moral uncertainty about private military work, the opportunity to return to service motivated by protection rather than profit felt like salvation. This was what she'd originally intended when she'd sworn military oath, serving causes larger than herself, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. The transition was surprisingly smooth. Her F-35 was transferred to Guardian Angel inventory, its systems upgraded with technology that exceeded even classified military specifications. Her new commanding officer was a British Royal Air Force veteran who'd left official service after politicians prevented him from intervening in Rwanda during the 1994 genocide. "Welcome to the island of misfit toys," Wing Commander James Morrison said during her orientation briefing. "We're all here because we care more about saving lives than following orders that let innocent people die." The base was hidden beneath a commercial airport in Eastern Europe, accessible through maintenance tunnels that connected to hangars disguised as cargo facilities. Guardian Angel aircraft were registered as civilian contractors, their true capabilities masked by paperwork that suggested routine freight operations. Her fellow pilots were extraordinary, veterans from every major air force, each with stories of bureaucratic frustration that had driven them to seek alternatives to governmental service. They shared her understanding that sometimes doing right required breaking rules written by people who'd never faced consequences for their decisions. Training was intensive but exhilarating, missions planned by intelligence officers who understood that precision was measured in saved lives rather than destroyed targets. Guardian Angel operations required surgical accuracy, minimal collateral damage, maximum humanitarian impact. Everything she'd wanted military service to be, but rarely was. Her first mission came within a week. Intelligence indicated that terrorist forces in West Africa were planning to poison water supplies serving refugee camps. Chemical weapons disguised as humanitarian aid, delivered by people who found entertainment in mass suffering. The kind of evil that required immediate response regardless of political complications or legal jurisdictions. Ghostwind, this is Angel Base. Target confirmation received. You are cleared for immediate intervention. The transmission was encrypted beyond military standards, secure communication that couldn't be intercepted by hostile intelligence services. Her F-35 lifted off into African night, stealth capabilities masking its presence from radar networks that might alert terrorist forces to incoming intervention. Below, the savannah stretched like a dark ocean, occasional lights marking villages where families slept unaware that their survival depended on precision strikes delivered by someone they would never meet. The terrorist compound was hidden among rocky outcroppings that provided natural camouflage against satellite surveillance. But thermal imaging revealed heat signatures that indicated large-scale chemical processing, industrial equipment that had no legitimate purpose in remote wilderness areas. Her targeting system locked onto storage tanks that contained enough poison to kill hundreds of thousands of people. One precision strike would eliminate the threat, saving lives that could be measured in statistical abstractions or cherished as individual human stories that deserved to continue. The explosion was visible for 50 miles, chemical storage tanks detonating in a chain reaction that consumed everything within the compound perimeter. Secondary explosions suggested they'd stored more than water additives, probably weapons, ammunition, and other materials intended for future terrorist operations. Angel Base, Ghostwind. Target neutralized, threat eliminated. Her transmission was calm, professional, but privately she felt satisfaction that had been missing from private military work. This was pure, saving innocent lives by eliminating people who intended to murder them. Ghostwind, Angel Base. Excellent work. Intelligence confirms terrorist cell has been completely eliminated. The response carried warmth that official military communications rarely possessed. People who understood that they were celebrating prevented tragedy rather than successful destruction. The flight home was peaceful, her F-35 climbing toward stars that seemed brighter than usual. Below, refugee camps continued their nightly routines, children sleeping safely because someone had cared enough to protect them from evil they didn't know existed. This was what she'd been looking for, purpose that aligned with her deepest values, service that protected innocent people without political complications or moral compromises. Guardian Angel missions were clean in ways that military operations rarely achieved, focused on humanitarian objectives that transcended national interests or economic considerations. Over the following months, she flew missions across 4 continents, each operation designed to prevent atrocities that governments couldn't or wouldn't address through normal diplomatic channels. Child soldiers liberated from warlords who used them as weapons. Villages protected from ethnic cleansing by militia forces. Hospitals defended from terrorist attacks that targeted medical personnel providing care to enemy wounded. Every mission reinforced her conviction that Guardian Angel represented military service as it should be, competent professionals using superior technology to protect vulnerable people from predators who thrived in zones where law enforcement was ineffective. Purpose without politics, action without bureaucracy, service without institutional corruption. Her reputation grew within the organization, callsign becoming synonymous with missions accomplished despite impossible odds. Ghostwind was the pilot they called when situations were desperate, when conventional solutions had failed, when success required someone willing to accept personal risk for humanitarian objectives. But success attracted attention from intelligence services that monitored irregular military activity. Guardian Angel operations were becoming too effective, their humanitarian interventions disrupting carefully balanced geopolitical calculations that depended on predictable levels of regional instability. The warning came through encrypted channels that couldn't be traced. Someone in position to know had discovered that major powers were planning to eliminate Guardian Angel as a disruptive influence on international affairs. Their humanitarian successes were interfering with proxy wars, arms sales, and other profitable activities that required ongoing conflict to maintain. Ghostwind, this is Angel Base. Emergency extraction protocols are now in effect. All pilots are to disperse immediately and await further instructions. The transmission was brief, urgent, carrying implications that meant their hidden war against evil had been discovered by people with power to stop it. She launched her F-35 within minutes, following predetermined routes that would take her to safe houses scattered across international networks that specialized in protecting people whose existence was inconvenient for governmental authorities. Guardian Angel had prepared for this possibility, establishing evacuation procedures that could scatter their pilots beyond the reach of official retaliation. But as she flew toward an uncertain future, Kestrel realized that her brief time with Guardian Angel had restored something essential that private military work had eroded: the conviction that her skills could serve purposes larger than profit, that military expertise could be directed toward protecting innocents rather than advancing interests that she didn't necessarily support. Whatever came next, she would remember that there were still people willing to fight for justice rather than money, still causes worth serving regardless of personal cost. Guardian Angel might be ending, but the ideals it represented would survive in people who refused to accept that evil was inevitable simply because good was difficult. The flight to Sanctuary took 12 hours through international airspace, her F-35 invisible to tracking systems that sought aircraft whose existence was officially denied. Behind her, Guardian Angel bases were being evacuated, equipment destroyed, personnel scattered to prevent capture by forces that preferred humanitarian crises to remain unresolved. But the example would survive, she knew. Other pilots would remember that alternatives existed to governmental service or private employment, that military skills could be used to protect people rather than advance policies determined by officials who never faced personal consequences for their decisions. The safe house was located in a neutral country where extradition treaties were deliberately vague, hidden among mountains that had sheltered refugees for centuries. Her new identity was waiting: passport, financial accounts, background documentation that would allow her to disappear completely from official records while maintaining access to resources necessary for continued operations. Wing Commander Morrison was already there, his weathered face carrying satisfaction mixed with sadness. Guardian Angel is finished as an organization, but the concept will survive. Pilots like you don't just disappear. You find ways to continue the mission under different auspices. "What's next?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would involve continued service in some form. "That depends on how much you're willing to sacrifice for ideals that most people consider naively optimistic." His response was honest, acknowledging that choosing principle over pragmatism required accepting consequences that weren't always pleasant. She considered the question seriously, weighing options that would define her remaining years. Return to private military work with its excellent pay and moral compromises, or find ways to continue serving humanitarian objectives despite the risks that such service entailed. The answer came easily, surprising her with its clarity. Guardian Angel had reminded her why she'd originally chosen military service: to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, to serve causes that transcended personal interest, to use her skills for purposes that made the world marginally safer for innocent people who deserved protection. "I'm willing to sacrifice whatever is necessary," she said, meaning it completely. Morrison smiled, the expression transforming his face from weathered professional to concerned mentor. "I hoped you would say that, because there's something new developing, something that might be even more important than Guardian Angel." He activated his secure tablet, displaying intelligence reports that outlined emerging threats requiring responses that no existing organization could provide. Climate refugees facing violence from populations that blamed them for resource shortages. Environmental terrorists using military hardware to attack infrastructure that supported millions of people. Corporate armies protecting profitable operations regardless of human costs. The world is changing, Kestrel. Traditional military forces aren't equipped to handle conflicts that transcend national boundaries, and governmental responses are compromised by political considerations that prevent effective action. We need something new, flexible, capable, committed to humanitarian objectives rather than national interests. The proposal was ambitious beyond anything Guardian Angel had attempted. An international network of highly skilled individuals operating independently but coordinated through secure communications, each contributing specialized expertise to solving problems that required unconventional approaches. Not an organization that could be destroyed, but a movement that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining consistent objectives. No fixed bases, no central command structure, no official existence that governments can target for elimination. Just competent people working together to protect innocent lives from threats that official channels can't or won't address. Morrison's vision was compelling, the natural evolution of everything Guardian Angel had learned about operating outside traditional military structures. She agreed immediately, understanding that this represented the culmination of everything her career had been building toward: individual responsibility for humanitarian,